Okay, let's see. Today is Monday, February 7th. We're meeting again on Wednesday. Midterm is coming up. Any questions on the midterm? We're preparing for the midterm. Yeah, go ahead. So this midterm looks like it's going to open at 8 a.m. on Monday, the 14th. And then it will close that Friday. And I think Friday it's open, it's like a full day. So I think it closes at like 10 p.m. or something. Last test out at 9. Truth is, hours probably enough for the test. The vast majority of students complete it in less than 90 minutes. There's always some that really stretch it out, but I'm really enjoying this test a lot. I want to, savor it or something, go for 2 hours. Okay. All right, well, let's go talk about the content for today. So there's a file to download for today, as there often is. This transactions.xlsm, just to give us some data to work with as we take a look at working with built-in functions. Now, the idea behind a function is it's just a block of code that runs, but when it's done running, it sends a value back to where it was called from. And you're used to working with functions because we use functions like crazy in Excel. And so like when you use the sum function, right? If we're to, well, let's see, what would be one that we could use? We could use like the ucase function right here in the cell. It's called upper here. Let me zoom in a bit. Right, so I mean, you're familiar with this, right? Equals upper, and then point it, it's just a function. I give it something to work on, it works on it, and it gives the result back to me. It just gives me the uppercase version of that. So that's the idea of a function. It's the same thing in VBA. So we've got a whole bunch of functions that are predefined in VBA that we can use. We're going to learn, maybe even next time we get together, but pretty soon we're going to learn that we can create our own functions. And when we create our own function, we can use those functions inside a cell just like these functions, or we can use them from VBA, either way. But today we're just kind of getting used to the built-in functions that are available to us in VBA. All right, so I think our first task here is to take this first name or this full name that's here and split it out into a first name and a last name. So we will specifically be looking at some functions that are meant for dealing with strings. So let's go ahead and do it. I'll open up our code editor, and it looks like I've already given us a sub procedure here. So I'll zoom out just a bit here. That is going to iterate across this data. So it looks like we've got TXN, that's probably the name of this worksheet. Let's just take a look real quick. I'm going to view my Project Explorer. That is not how I want to see the Project Explorer. That's better. Okay, yeah, so here is, we have a worksheet called TXN is a code name, and the name on the label is transactions, and that's the one that we're seeing here. So we're going to loop until, starting with a variable R at 2, and we're just going to loop until it gets down to the bottom by adding 1 each time. So whatever we do here should just run for each of these 278 records that we have. Okay, so what I'd like to do, in fact, we'll just take this one as a sample here. I could print that and it would print the whole string, but so any thoughts on what we're going to do here to be able to split this into first name and last name? Because right now it's the full name, last name, comma, first name, and I want to split it into first and last name. Did you do any of the preparation for class today, any of the reading? So what functions might be useful here? Go ahead. Left. Okay, so we're going to want the left of this. Good, we're going to want the left certain number of characters. So left function, left, and what is that, 8 or so? So comma 8. So this function just says, left, just says I want the leftmost certain number of characters from a string. And it looks like I really want 7. I don't really want that comma there. So it looks pretty good. I've got the leftmost 7 characters of this string, and I'm pretty happy about that. But the trouble is, everyone's first name is not 7 characters long. Mine's only 4. I often thought my parents didn't love me very much to give me such a short name. Just 4 characters. Anyway, so when someone has just a short name of 4 characters, then we're gonna have to, so it's gonna have to be different based on how long that first name is. And how can we tell how long the first name is? Yeah, it's the position of that comma right there. So let me just play with that for a minute. INSTR in string is going to look for one string inside of another. Now, the first argument is, where do we start looking? I want to start looking at the first character. And then what string are we going to be looking at? What are we going to be looking for? I'm going to be looking for the comma. And that should return to me where that occurs. So that occurs at the 8th character. That's right, because it's the 7 characters before it are the one that make up the first name. That's pretty good. Now, let's do one other thing here. Let's say I'm looking for the capital G. It's going to show at the 10th character. But you'll notice that, I think there's another argument in this one. Yeah. You'll notice that if I look for a lowercase g, it's not going to find it. There's no lowercase g in here. So this is case sensitive. And that's going to be the thing in VBA, is that when you are comparing 2 strings to each other, it's going to be case sensitive. Most of the places we're not worried about case. The names of functions aren't case sensitive. The names of variables aren't case sensitive. A lot of stuff in the language isn't case sensitive, but when we're comparing 2 strings to each other, it's case sensitive. It turns out the in-string function allows us to say, no, binary comparison is the default. That means case matters. Database comparison, seems like this looks for some setting in Windows to decide if it's case sensitive or not. We're going to skip that one. And a text comparison says, no, not case sensitive. So even if it's not a match in case, go ahead and use it. So you can control whether this matches for case or not by setting this to be either leaving it off or putting VB text compare in here. But let's go ahead and go back to looking for the comma. And of course, since comma is not alphabetic, whether it's case sensitive or not won't matter, because there's no uppercase. It's not like uppercase comma is like the greater than symbol because it's on the same key of your keyboard or anything. It's just uppercase only pertains to letters. Okay, so now that's going to give me 8. But what did I really want? I don't want the first 8 characters. I want the first 7 characters. So I'll adjust that by subtracting 1 off the end. And so this now gives me the position, this in string of where the comma is. Oh no, I want -1, not -7. There we go. So this expression now will tell me how many characters I want to take for pulling the first name off. So I can take this back to left, looking at that string, and looking for, here's where it gets a little bit weird, because I'm going to embed that in string function right in there. So right before where I had the number 7 written to pull off this last name, now I've got an expression that's going to find where the comma is, adjust that number to be able to figure out, for this one, the last name is 7 characters. Okay, I went through that pretty quickly. Show me, scale of 0 to 5, how comfortable you are with it so far. 5, 5, 5. Professor, please move on. Okay, I will. Let's go ahead and put this in here. So it's, I guess I don't mind printing that off, but something is going to equal that. And what is it going to be? It's going to be column 3, column 4 is where we're putting the last name. So our column 4 is going to equal that. And if I run that, then we should lay in the last names. Oh, except I'm looking actually at this hard-coded string. So here I want to put in whatever is in column 2 because that, so now I'm looking at what's the current value in column 2 for whatever row we're on, and then should be plugging those different values in. So why are those commas coming here? See how we got the comma here? Wonder what's going on. Don't have any extra spaces in there. The left of this, oh, it's because I'm looking for, I need to change this part as well. Let me go a little bit bigger. So my in string has to be dynamic as well. So here I'm looking for that same expression. Wow, that's a long, ugly line. So we're putting a new value into whichever row we're on, column 4. We're going to be looking at what are values in column 2 and how many characters off the left are we taking? Well, however many we find before the comma in that same column 2. All right, now that we have this embedded in, are there any questions? Did I just turn that on? Okay. All right. You want to tackle the first name as a little exercise? Let's take 4 minutes and why don't you strip out the first name and have that go into the first name column. Might be a little bit more challenging, but let's give it a shot. Let's go for 4 minutes. All right, why don't we go ahead and take a look? Oh, maybe I should have done it too while we were at it. Okay, so I'm just going to copy this line because it's going to be pretty close to this. I think I've started recording. Yeah, you waited too long to interrupt me if I had forgotten. Jump right in. All right, so which column am I going to be replacing? Looks like it's going to go into column 3. So I'll make that change here. How many of you worked on this using the right function? Let's use the right function for this. How many of you used a different function besides right? A few of you here, well, about half and half. Let's go ahead and do it with the right function first. Actually, let's do it with the mid function first. And then we'll come back and look at it with the right function. A little more complex using the right function. So we got a function called mid, which takes a string out of the middle of another string. So if I've got our other person up here, so mid is going to say, all right, looking at this string, I'm going to start somewhere in the middle, like the 10th character, and I'll tell it how many characters bring back 3. And that brought back space I. So let's actually do 3, 10, 11, 12, 13. Let's try that to 13 and bring back 3. So this is the 13th character. So it starts there and it brings back 3 more. But if I don't tell it how many to bring back, it'll just bring back the end of the string. So that's actually kind of handy in this situation. So by saying mid here, and now I can just find the position of that comma, and instead of subtracting 1 from it to come back this way, I want to add, to come back this way, I want to add 2 to it because I don't want the comma, I don't want the space, I want the next one after it. So I'll change this to +2. And that should do it. So if I use mid here, it's going to be a really straightforward modification of it. Now, Using right will also work, because of course right is going to take something off the right side of the string. So let's go ahead and convert this to right. The trouble is now I'm counting from the right side of the string instead of from the left. And so my index position, or the position of where I found the comma, is telling me how many characters up until the comma, and I got to take from the other side of the string. So what I'm going to do for that one is I'm going to introduce this function, len. The len function will return the length of a string. So that tells me that string is 17 characters long. So if my in-string function starting at 1, looking at this, looking for a comma. So my in-string function gives me 8, and my string is 17. So I think what I'm really interested in is how many characters from the right. I need some combination of those. 1. So I'm 17, and this is at the 8th character. So I'm going to want like the 17th minus 8, maybe plus 2 or something. Let's just see what that does. So if I take my length now minus my in string, that's going to take the rightmost 9 characters. I don't think we're quite right. It'll take a little adjustment. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So it looks like we want to just subtract 1 more off of that. And that expression now will get us to the rightmost 8 characters. It's a little unfortunate that I picked someone that had 8 characters in before and 8 characters after, because that's a little bit confusing. So let's just go ahead and drop this one. It's got a different length for first name and last name in there. So that's now 11 is where it's finding it just at the beginning. And yeah, and that's correctly calculating that we want to pull off this first name, we want the last 4 characters. So this whole expression is going to get us what we need for how many characters from the right I need. So this is now right here. I'm going to tell it how many characters I want. That expression, but of course we have to set it up not to have good old Wmi hard-coded in there. Where I've got Wmi, I'll replace it with a reference to whichever value happens to be on the row we're looking at. And that should do the same thing. I'm going to go ahead and clear off this column and run that code again. Yeah, looks like it brings those first names in just fine. All right, so that's mid, left, right, in string, and len. Those are kind of a pretty powerful set of string manipulation functions. And it turns out that parsing data, like parsing string data, is something that I do a lot in VBA. Because one of the things that VBA is really useful for is saying, listen, I've got data coming in from some other source, and it's not in the right format, and I've got to kind of work through it and adjust it so it is in the right format. All right, questions? All right. Phone 2, what was I thinking of for phone 2 here? I think what I want to do here in phone 2 is I would like to change the format of this, actually. Yeah, let's change the format of this to be like parentheses around the area code, kind of another standard format here. So I'd like to move that data that way. Now, to do this, we're going to look at a couple of other things. I happen to notice that I think there's like a space on the beginning of this, is there? Can you see that space there? That's a really common thing. Fortunately, there's a really simple way for us to get rid of both leading and trailing spaces on a string. How would you do that in a function in Excel? Does anyone know the function that does that in Excel? Yeah? Yeah, so there's this function called trim in Excel, but it does a little bit more. Not only does it, the function, the built-in function for Excel takes leading spaces, trailing spaces, and it also collapses sequential spaces in the middle of the string down to a single space. So you've got 12 spaces together, it'll shrink it down to one space. Like if we were to put into this a bunch of spaces between that right in there and use trim on it, it's going to squish that big long set of spaces down to 1, and we can see that it's taken off the space in front of the 5. It turns out the function that we're after in Excel is, or in VBA, is also called trim, but trim doesn't touch the middle of the string in VBA. Trim only takes leading and trailing spaces. What would we do in VBA if we really wanted to trim exactly the same way the trim function does? Well, it turns out we can call the functions that are built into Excel from VBA, and we'll see that later. Okay, but let's go ahead and work on getting this split. So my first step is going to be to get that leading space off. So let me go ahead and just copy one of these. So now this phone 2 is in column F. So I'll just put column F here. And we'll start again here. All I want to do, so step 1 is going to be to get rid of that trailing space. So I'll call the function called trim, and then tell it we're looking in column G. Not sure why I lost my keyboard there. So this is going to, so wait, do I have that right? Oh no, I want it off of E. I'm taking it off of E and putting it in F. So we're going to say, take a look at whatever is in E, trim it. So take off leading and trailing spaces, and then drop it into F. So now we've gotten rid of that leading space. Turns out there's an analog called Ltrim, which takes off leading spaces only. I'll run that one again, it'll do the same thing. So it's gotten rid of that leading space. Maybe you can see it there. There's also one called Rtrim, which takes off trailing spaces, but leaves leading spaces alone. So if there was any trailing spaces, they're gone, but that leading space is still there. So there's Ltrim, Rtrim, and just trim that work with that. Now, because I've got 3 segments of data here that are separated by the same delimiter, this hyphen, there's another function that's kind of interesting called split. Let me take one of these and just bring it up here. So I can say I want to call the split function. I'm going to look at a string. In this case, I'm looking at this string. And then the second argument is I tell it what I want it to split by. I'm going to split by the hyphen. Now, this is going to return a complex data structure. This is not going to return a string. All the other ones we've done so far have either returned a string or a number, right? In string returns an integer. It tells us where it finds the character. All the rest of them return strings, but this is going to return an array. It's going to return a set of strings. We have 2 whole days where we talk about really understanding arrays. And so I'm not really going to get you to grasp what an array is today, but just realize this is going to send back 3 strings, and I need to do something to tell it which one I want. And so the way I tell it which one I want is like just putting a number here, and that will bring back the number 2 string that this other string gets split into. And so I get 6847. Wait a minute, 6847 looks like the number 3 string. It turns out that arrays, which is what this split function returns, they start counting at 0. And so it's actually space 520 is what the first string that this string gets cut into when I split it. using the hyphen. Show me where you are on this one, 0 to 5. 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5. No, I made it sound really easy. Question. So a vector, you're comparing a vector to an array. So a vector is one dimensional. So it's a list. It's a list of values. An array can be multidimensional. So it can be a grid. It can be a cube. It can be a structure that is in 4 dimensions, 5 dimensions, 6 dimensions. So it's a little more than just a vector. Okay. So that's super. I'm going to take this first one. We're going to trim it. Actually, why don't I, instead of, I'm going to split it before I trim it. So you'll notice that I've still got that space in here. So let me just wrap a trim around this to get rid of that space. And so now we're getting rid of that. Oh, it's like I'm yelling it in a strange language. So I'm going to go ahead and put my split function inside of this trim. Split. And just that expression, I'm going to split based on a hyphen. Then I'm going to bring back the 0th item. Okay, so that should put just the area code into column F. 202.706. And I think we've gotten rid of that leading space. Okay, so far so good. Now, I also, but what I'm really after, I want to put the parentheses on front of that. So just string concatenation, which we've played with almost since the very beginning, first day of class. So I'm going to put opening parenthesis on front of it. I'm going to put a closing parenthesis after it. And that should now, put a closing parenthesis and a space after it. And that should give me the first part of that now in parentheses. Ah, what did it do? What did it do? That is a really strange result here. What happened to the parentheses? Yeah, go ahead. Ah, that's right. So if I put in parentheses a number, Excel looks like, oh, you must mean a negative number. It converted it for me. That's not such a big deal because as soon as we put on the rest of the number, it's going to quit. As soon as we put the rest of the phone number on, it's going to quit doing it. Let's go ahead and get the next part on right now. So I'm going to concatenate on. Then I'm going to bring over that same split expression. I don't need to trim now because the only place I have the problem is on the leading space. But I'm now going to look at, and same expression, but I'm bringing back the number 1 element instead of the number 0 element. So let's put in the next part of that. Then I want to concatenate on a hyphen and then concatenate on the number 2 part of that. That's a long string. I'm going to go ahead and break this onto multiple lines. And that will then make that new format for the telephone number. Did I run it yet? I don't know. Any questions here? One of the things that you start to realize pretty quickly when you start doing any kind of complex text parsing is that your expressions really get ugly. And so it's really important to work through it methodically. And one of the things that I always try to do is is instead of trying to write out a long expression and try to keep track where the parentheses go, as soon as I put that opening parenthesis, put the closing parenthesis in and then work on the inside of it. As soon as I put the opening quote, put the closing quote in and then work on the inside of it. Because if I was to kind of get to the end of this and wonder, do I just need one closing parenthesis on the end, or should I have two closing on the end? I've kind of long since forgotten how I started to write this. So kind of working them up piece by piece, getting the syntax in first, and then building the logic around it is a helpful approach. Okay, so it looks like we're going to try to split street address into, or address into street, city, state, and zip. What is going to be new here? Okay, so kind of using what we learned about split, let's just take a second and go ahead and let's pull in street address and city. Let's not worry about separating the state and the zip yet. Let's take about 4 minutes and just pull off. We're gonna look here at column G. Let's get the address into street address, and let's get the city into the city column. I'll go back to my code here in just a second. If that's helpful to you, I don't know. How many of you did that, successfully did that? Just a handful. How many of you were like trying to do it and didn't get there in the 4 minutes? A few of you? Okay, so let's take a look. So I think what I'd like to do, let's go ahead and bring in one of these addresses to look at. Bring this, and I'm going to bring in that address. There's my string I'm working with. And I'm going to split it. Now, I could split this based on the comma, or I can do it based on the comma space. I can split on more than just one character. So now I'm going to find every occurrence of comma space, and I'm going to use that to split. So I'll ask for the 0th one. That should be the street address. The number 1 should be the city. And so I'm looking to put this in column H. So we'll say column H is going to be equal to split column G is what we're looking at. And we're going to split that based on comma space. It always looks a little bit weird to be splitting on something with a comma, because we use the comma to separate between arguments and the call to the function, and we're using it as a string literal here as well. That's going to be the number 0. And then I is going to be the number 1. And that should put in the street and city. Now the state is a little more difficult because, I've got to split it again. Now I could pull off the city, and, the state and the zip code using this same expression. And then I could just split this again, but I want to introduce you to a new function. So maybe let me go ahead and I'm going to run you through doing this kind of 2 splits in a row. And then I'm going to show you a different way. Okay, so looking at the number 2, this expression right here is going to be the state and the zip. So I could split this one. Ooh, split there. This is the string I'm splitting, comma, and I want to split that based on a space. Oh, that's going to be a problem. Let's get started and we'll see the problem. And then I want to take the 0th position. And instead of putting in I, that's going to go into J. Looks pretty good. Alabama, Ohio, Louisiana, South. What's wrong with this one? South Dakota or South Carolina has a space in the name of the state, and that's what I'm using to split it by. So the split here is going to be a little problematic. It would be okay if I didn't have states, or if I was delimiting between the state and the zip code with something that wasn't in the state. If there was a comma or a dash or something in there, but there's not. So we're not going to be able to use this approach to split that out. So I think I'm going to declare a variable here called position, short, I'll just abbreviate it to POS. That really is an abbreviation for position. Dim pose as, why don't I do it as a byte? I don't think I'm going to have longer than 255 characters here. Oh, but I might. Let's do integer. Okay, so now I'm going to say that position is equal to INSTREV. INSTREV. It's the reverse of in string. So now I'm going to be looking for the first comma from the right of the string. And it will return to me how many characters it is from the beginning of the string. So it's not going to tell me how far it is from the right. I'm going to start looking at the right, but it's going to tell me how many characters it is from the left when it finds it. So actually, let's go ahead and play with that with an actual string literal to start with. Here's our South Carolina. So I'm looking for the last in string reverse. Oh, I got to tell what I'm looking for, comma. And so that should be 29 characters is be where that comma is. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I must have counted wrong because that really is a 29th character. Okay, so in string reverse, so my position variable is going to be in string reverse looking at column G, looking for comma. Okay, so now I'm going to want the mid of column G, starting at my position plus 2. Again, it will have found that here, and I don't want the comma, I don't want the space, so I'm going to add 1 to get past those. And that should then, oh, this is not what I'm after. That will give me that, that'll give me that data, but it's this, I'm actually looking for this space. Sorry, I wasn't quite thinking through that. So what I'm looking for here is this space. So that will show me where the space is. And plus 1, because there's only 1 character that I'm trying to skip. And that should then give me just the zip code. I think we'll have gotten everything except for down to the state at this point. Oh, I have a little trouble with the zip code. What's wrong with my zip codes here? What's wrong with that zip code right there? Yeah, not that it might have, it does. You can see it right here with the 0 in front. And so again, when I drop text into a cell in Excel, it looks at it and goes, oh, yeah, that's a number. And it converts it to a number for me. I got a couple of things I can do. Let me show you how to handle it in code. Well, this is actually how you handle it in the cell itself. And that is, I'm going to concatenate on a single quote at the beginning of this. That is a really weird looking thing. So that is a single quote character inside of 2 double quote characters. Single quote literal. Another way that I could do that is by saying I want character 39. So character number 39 is that quote. So if this thing is a little confusing to you, as it is for me, we can say, no, we're talking about character number 39. By putting a single quote in the front of it and putting that into the value, it's going to maintain that leading 0. It's going to tell Excel, hey, this really is text. CHR. So now I've got the leading 0 here just fine. Now, this was troubling to me when I first looked at this because I thought, well, hey, there's actually a single quote in there. So it doesn't display here, but surely that must be part of the value, but no, it's not. So I'm on one of these zip codes. And if I just ask for the value of the active cell, it brings it back without that quote. So putting that single quote into the cell says, oh yeah, this is just text. And by the way, don't try to format this as a number. What's my other approach that I could do without having to drop this single quote onto the front? Well, it turns out if I was just to format this column as text, then when I write the values into it, even without the single quotes, it's not going to try to parse them into numbers. Because now it knows, oh, did I not? Column K, let me go ahead and delete these out. So there's nothing there. I'm putting into column K, no initial single quote. That looks good. All right. I did not expect it to put that single quote on there. Just because I formatted this column as text. Let me just try that again. Different column, text. I put in a number. Yeah, there's no single quote on the front of that. What am I missing here? H-I-J-K-L. Let's put that in L and see what happens. Okay, when I put it into L, there's no single quote. So why does it put a single quote when I put it into K? Anyone know? You guys are geniuses. Anyone know? I have no idea. I'm going to try it again. I deleted that. Who knows what setting I might have set on that cell? Yeah, now they're not there. Wow, it must have done some kind of formatting to deal with that single quote. I bet it does. And when I plugged it in there, it did that, it set that format. Yeah. Oh, now the zeros are gone. Oh, yeah, thank you. Okay, so that's fine. Let's clear this out. Let's set this as text. By the way, do you know the keystroke that brings up the format cells straight away? Like with one tap, it's Control 1. I learned that keystroke, and that's like the keystroke I use more than anything else, Control 1. So I'm gonna set this as text. And now let me try to run that again. Yeah, so it's not doing it. Interesting. But it must have put some kind of format on there. I don't want to spend any more time kind of fiddling with it, but the point is, if you set that as text before, so two ways: leave it set for a number, put a single quote on it, and that will take care of it, or just change the format of that to be text, and then you can drop the number straight in and it will maintain the leading zero. All right. Wondering what I had in mind for that other column. Oh, yeah, I guess the example that I had in mind for full postal was just let the postal ones come in here, losing the leading zeros, and then we'll do it right in this one. So we did it all here in column K. Okay, so it's kind of an interesting one here. And this is actually something that I deal with when I import your email addresses from AIM. Like if I copy your email addresses out, this is how these email addresses come in. And what do you see? What do you see unusual about this? Yeah, go ahead. Oh, we skipped the state. Well, I didn't see it because I think I wrote it in, but we're missing the spaces in here. All right, so shall we, let's go ahead and get that state. Yeah, here, I think the fastest way there with what we've already written is going to be similar to this right here. Okay, let me take this. So let's go ahead and do one for state. State is column L? J? I'll copy this line. I wish I put some comments in here. This one's state. This is zip. Okay, so this is going to go into J. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the left of this. So this is finding that last space. So this is what we use to find out where the zip code is. I'm going to take the left of that. That position is where that last space is, and I'm going to -1 off of it. So now, instead of taking the mid, starting after the space, I'm taking the left before the space. So now this is everything except the space and the zip code. So now that I don't have the zip code as a part of this, I can split this using a comma. So this is, I can just, now the only thing after that last comma is going to be the state, right? If I've gotten rid of the zip code off of here, only thing after the comma is the state. So I'm going to come in here and split this expression based on comma space, and then take the number 2 item. And that should give us our state, South Carolina included. Here's South Carolina with the full state name. When you have to parse text like this, it can be pretty creative. You got to kind of look, it's like solving a puzzle. How am I going to get at that in such a way that is kind of repeatable and going to work with the data that I have here? All right. Now, when I first look at this zip code, or this, not zip code, but this email address, I'm looking at it and thinking, oh yeah, look at that. I got spaces on the front of this. In fact, I got 2 spaces on the front of this. No problem. So this is column N. In fact, where am I doing the trim? Do I have trim anywhere just by itself? I don't. Okay, so let's go ahead and do email. So this is N. I'm putting the value in N, and it's going to be coming out of just trim N, trim M. Okay, this looks pretty good, right? I'm just looking at what's in column M, I'm trimming it, and I'm going to put it in column N. I'll run that. And it seems to have had no effect. Or wait, maybe it, yeah, there's still 2 spaces on the front of that. These are like Superman spaces. They're totally impervious to the effect of trim. What's going on? Anyone have any idea? I don't know if you might have run into this somewhere in your work or something. I heard someone say something. So yeah, it's a special kind of space. Now, when we talk about space, normally, let's show you what kind of space we're talking about. Let's look at the ASCII table. I'm pretty sure we peeked at the ASCII table once before. Tell me if this looks somewhat familiar. Let's see, this one should do the trick. So remember, there we go. So remember that when we, that everything, when we store something on the computer, has to be converted into 1s and 0s. So how do we store, and we saw how we can convert numbers into 1s and 0s, just by converting things into base 2. That works out okay. But how are we going to store letters? Well, the answer is capital A is number 65. And so capital A is number 65. So we store number 65. We know it's a string. So when we read that out of memory, we go, oh, 65, but I know it's a string. I use this table to convert it into the character to show. That's how it works. Well, space character is number 32. And that is the space character that we generate when we hit the space bar. But as it turns out, I'm showing you 128 different characters here, and those are like the 128 standard ones. And then there's another set that goes up to 256. There's another 128. And those are not always defined the same from computer system to computer system. Have you ever been somewhere on a web page and you looked and you went, whoa, that character shouldn't be that character. It looks like, someone put like a euro symbol right in the middle of a word where a quote begins. Have you seen that? Yeah, you've seen that. And that's because those symbols that are above 128, they're defined to look different on different systems. And so what it was probably a fancy quote, because if it's a regular old quote, it's going to look like here. Character number 34 is a normal quote. But you've seen that in Word, haven't you? When you type a quote and it looks like a little quote and then it immediately changes into being a fancy quote that goes one way for the opening quote, another way for the closing quote. You've seen that, yeah? Well, those fancy quotes are up above 128. And so there's not universal agreement about how that character number should be displayed. And what we have on this space, which is a space, on this, it's a space in web lingo that we refer to as a non-breaking space. Normally in HTML, if you put like 12 spaces together in a row, the browser's gonna go, you don't need 12 spaces, that's wasteful. And it will shrink them down into a single space. But if you do want to actually have a bunch of spaces stay together, you call them non-breaking spaces. Those don't get taken away. They're not character number 32, they're some other character. I think they're character 160, but I'm not positive. We're gonna find out what it is here in just a minute. You ready to find that out? Okay. So I'm going to look over here at, let's see, who do we've got? We must have a state. Okay, so here I am, Arkansas. I'm on J26. So I am going to look at range J26. Here's Arkansas. I'm going to want the leftmost one character of that. That's A. Well, I can ask what character that is in the ASCII table by saying ASC. It's abbreviation for ASCII. What is the ASCII value of that character? It's 65, right? That's when we talk. That's like it's one of the few I have memorized. Capital A is 65. Okay, so now instead of looking at range J26, this is getting the first character off of J26. I'm going to go look at N26. And that's going to tell me that's character number 160, which is a non-breaking space. It really is a space, but it's impervious to trim because it's not character number 32. So now we need some way to say, I want to replace character number 160. And we can actually print character number 160. That the analog to ASC is called CHR. So ASC says, look at a character and tell me its number. CHR says, look at a number and tell me its character. So I can do CHR 65, and that'll print capital A. I can do CHR 160, and that prints a non-breaking space. Right there, that is that character. It looks a whole lot like a space to you and me, but it's not. Space is 32, this is 160. So here's what I'm going to do. Instead of trim, I'm going to use replace. Replace, R-E-P-L-A-C. Replace says, look at some string. Second argument says, find every occurrence of some other string, CHR, character number 160, and replace it with still some other string. And I'm going to replace it with a zero-length string. So quote, quote. So now it's going to find every occurrence of that non-breaking space, and it's going to replace it with an empty string. It's going to delete that non-breaking space out. So now if I run that, it should get rid of those spaces. Yeah, so now I've pulled those spaces off the front, those hideous non-breaking spaces. Oof. Questions? Who invented a non-breaking space? I'd like to spank him. Seems like there's a better way. I don't know. All right. What else we got going on in this wonderful sheet? Are we all out? What do we got going on here? WMI. WMI. So kind of here, looking here at this VIN, you've got, has anyone worked in the automobile industry? You know something about VIN numbers? Yeah, so what kind of information, someone who knows, can they tell by looking at the VIN? So if you know where to look, you can see the year the car was made. You can definitely tell the manufacturer, and it may give you information about the factory. I'm not sure about that. It'll also tell you the country of the manufacturer of the car. It'll show the year and the WMI. I forget what the WMI is. Okay, so I think we may have to look up real quick. VIN wiki. VIN wiki? No, I just want Wikipedia talking about VIN. World Manufacturer Identifiers, what WMI stands for. VIN.com. How do you get to Wikipedia these days? There we go. So the World Manufacturer Identifier is the first three characters. So, well, or looks like you've got some different standards. North America, the first two characters. 2,000 or fewer vehicles a year. So, so we could pull out, you could, right? Just by pulling out the leftmost 3 characters, you could pull out the WMI. Oh, and in fact, what do we have here? Ah, there we go. So we've got the WMI lookup. So this will tell you where it came from, and this will tell you who the manufacturer is. So we could take that information and we could do a lookup on this table and bring in who the manufacturer is, as well as the country of the manufacturer. WMI, the year digit. And so we have a lookup for the year digit as well. So the year digit goes like this. L is 1990 all the way up to Y, which is the year 2000. And then 1 through 9 corresponds to the first 9 years of the century. And then we go A through K. That'll give us a 2019. Uh-oh. What do we do for 2020? That's the reason everything's happening now. The world broke in 2020 because we're out of manufacturer years in the VIN. Do you know what it does for 2020? It goes back to L. So when you look at the year digit, if it's L, you can't tell just by looking at it if it's a 1990 car or a 2020 car. You can't tell by looking at the digit. Hopefully you can tell by looking at the car. But yeah, that's the way that the standard is defined. So where is this year digit? There's all those. 10th character. Okay, so for our last little example, just want you to pull out the year digit off those VINs. Yeah, and you probably don't have time to actually do the lookup here, but just go ahead and pull the year digit in. Where am I? Into column W. It is the 10th character in that string. Got just a couple minutes for the end of class. I'll get us started on it. It's column W. And we'll be looking at column R. Okay, what function should I use? I want to pull out the 10th digit. Mid function, starting at the 10th character, taking 1 character. Apparently, I put these in order by year. All right. Well, I'll call that good for today. Oh, by the way, we only dealt with string functions. There are all kinds of mathematic functions as well built in. So you can get like the absolute value, there's a function for that. The square root, there's a function for that. You want to square a number, there's a function for that. You want the sine of a number, the tangent of a number, the secant of a number. Did I even say those right? Yeah, there's functions for those too. So there's lots and lots and lots of math functions, and we kind of scratched the surface on functions today. So anyway, lots to look for. Thanks for coming, folks. We'll see you next time. Class dismissed.